Last spring, I was watching a repeat of an episode of Law and Order SVU with my mom. In this episode, one of the subplots was about Captain Olivia Benson's son, Noah, a boy of about 8 years old, getting bullied by a boy named Hudson. At the end of the episode, Noah says he doesn't understand why Hudson chose to bully him, and he explains how Hudson went after other kids too, including one who uses they-them pronouns, whom Hudson started calling a fairy. Then I said that I was bi, Noah tells his mom. Noah goes on to say, and there's no shame in being true to yourself. My mom pipes up with, how does he know the word bi at that age? And how does he even know that he is? I replied rather defensively that I knew at that age. She said, you knew that you were different. No, I replied, I knew, meaning that I knew precisely how I was different. It took me a couple of days before it hit me though. And then I was like, wait a minute. How did you know that you were straight at that age? That's what I wish I had said to my mom. How did you know that you were straight? We live in a heteronormative society. Heteronormativity is the concept that heterosexuality is the preferred or normal mode of sexual orientation. It assumes the gender binary and that sexual and marital relations are most fitting between people of opposite sex. So what my mother was really saying to me when she said you knew that you were different is you knew you were different from normal. Now mind you, my mother wasn't intending to be mean to me with her statement. My mother loves me and accepts me as a lesbian. But she, like all of us who grew up in a heteronormative society, has internalized the heterosexism and homophobia that underpin it. That's the reason it did not occur to me to reply to her with the question, how did you know that you were straight? She didn't have to figure it out. It was assumed. And since she is a heterosexual cisgender woman, she had nothing to figure out. It was handed to her. You knew you were different from normal. Yes, I knew from a very early age. I can remember knowing from at least first grade, if not earlier. And heteronormativity affected the way that I framed that knowing for myself. What I knew is that I felt about other girls what I was supposed to be feeling for boys. And that is exactly the way I describe my feelings to myself from that young age up through my mid-teens. I felt about other girls what I was supposed to be feeling for boys. I felt such a disconnection in that framing of myself, as well as an aloneness, because I did not see myself reflected back to me anywhere. Not in my family, or friends, or church, or television, or music, or books. In fact, I remember thinking to myself, this just cannot be. By which I meant that my feelings could not possibly exist. I felt like a complete anomaly. I would say that I felt completely alone, like I was the only person having romantic feelings for the same gender, but that does not quite capture it. I don't know that I could put my feelings about myself from that time into words. I just felt like I was feeling things that could not be humanly possible. Of course, as I got to be a teenager, I did finally learn about the concept of homosexuality. And I also learned that homosexuals were definitely not seen as normal. Fags, dykes, they were abnormal, aberrant, bad, disordered. Like it says in the book of Leviticus, if a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood be upon them. It seemed that gays were deserving of any abuse that normal, that is, straight people could dish out. In this atmosphere, coming to accept myself as a lesbian was something that even begins to look like love, took a multitude of little acts of courage. And truth be told, that is a process that continues even to this day. By the time I had completed my senior year of college, I, for the first time, applied in my mind the word lesbian to myself. I'm not talking about telling other people that I'm a lesbian. I'm just talking about telling myself. That was so scary to admit myself that I could be one of them. And yet, I had a friend in college whom I, and everyone in our circle of friends, knew is gay. And I loved him. Still, it was hard to think of myself as being both gay and worthy of the basic love and respect that we all deserve as human beings. Early in graduate school, I bought a couple of books about LGBTQ topics. After I read them, I felt a little more positive about who I am. But what I remember most about these books is what I did with them when I scheduled the surgery that I had needed at 25. I got rid of them. In fact, I actually threw these books away. Why? I was terrified that if I died during surgery, my parents would go through my things and come across them. I couldn't bear the thought of them knowing that I was gay. Why? I was still so deeply ashamed of my sexual orientation. I didn't give up, though, despite the setbacks in learning to accept myself. I continued to read books that discussed LGBTQ issues of all kinds, from coming out to mental health issues to the history of our civil rights movement. I also began to seek out supportive people. I joined a women's coming out group at the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland, which was as much, if not more, about self-acceptance as it was about coming out to other people. I remember driving in snowstorms from Kent, when I was still technically in graduate school, to Cleveland because I was that desperate to experience positivity around my sexual orientation. I also discovered Unitarian Universalism at this time and found incredibly supportive communities, first at the UU Church of Kent and then here at Southwest UU. One of the things that attracted me to SWU was this congregation's participation in Cleveland's Pride Parade and Festival. Many members and friends marched to the parade, and SWU regularly challenged other UU churches in the size of our delegation, despite being a smaller church. What really impressed me the most is that so many of you brought your children to the parade. You supported LGBTQ rights as the most natural thing for our church to be doing. It really means a lot to me, and I guarantee that it means a lot to people who perhaps are unable to come out for any number of reasons. Seeing yourself supported as a human being, even if the people supporting you don't know that you are LGBTQ, means the world. I turned 13 in 1978. I graduated from high school in 1984. I graduated from college in 1988. Some things have changed for the better since then. There are more images of LGBTQ people in the news and in movies and TV shows that are positive than there were when I was a young person. There are laws in some localities that protect us from discrimination in housing and employment. Gay people have the right to marry. And yet some things aren't so different after all. I just said that gay people have the right to marry, but I probably should have added the words "at the moment." Because the legal reasoning that the U.S. Supreme Court used in the Dobbs decision could easily be used to overturn the decision that extended to gay folks the right to marry. The normalization of hate and violence toward minorities of all types is continuing at an alarming rate. Transgender youth are facing attack for wishing to use the restroom that corresponds to their gender. And their parents are facing prosecution in some parts of the country for seeking gender-affirming medical care for them. And so, we still have a long way to go for that young girl that I was, and who felt so alone and scared and like she wasn't supposed to feel the way she did. We still have a long way to go for that young girl to feel safe and supported. The threat of violence and abuse toward LGBTQ folks is still prevalent. Moreover, we still live in a heteronormative society where even the most understanding of people still often assume that a person is a cisgender heterosexual until proven otherwise. I think young LGBTQ people still have to figure out a lot on their own. And it remains unsafe for many people, young and old, to live their lives as their authentic selves. As long as these conditions prevail, that young girl that I was, and in many ways still is, will never feel safe.
think I accidentally touched your pad. It might have gone down a little bit. It might not be where you need it to be.
It's okay. Like Deb said, there's 3 things that go wrong.
There we go.
Well, like Allie mentioned, it is National Coming Out Day in a couple of days. And National Coming Out Day is a day that I have a bit of a complicated relationship with. And don't get me wrong, I'm really happy that we have a day to celebrate the innate courage that is present in revealing a part of yourself to friends and family without being able to control the consequences of what might happen. That is a beautiful thing. And I know many people who have used National Coming Out Day as a springboard to come out to the world. I actually did a few years ago when I told everyone I was non-binary back in 2019. With that being said, for those of you who may know my story and my family background, it's probably not a surprise that I always haven't had positive feelings towards National Coming Out Day. And if you do not know, I was raised by a conservative Baptist family. I'm a missionary kid and a pastor's kid. And I attended a bit of an infamous university founded by the late Jerry Falwell Sr. called Liberty University in Virginia. And Liberty University, where I got my degree in religious studies, has an active practice of conversion therapy, which I did unfortunately experience while I was there. And I do have the tendency to sometimes expel openly gay students, which I also had a bit of a close call with my senior year. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I know that mental health is a difficult subject and I want to be respectful of that, so I'm going to keep this brief. But it's probably not also a surprise that my mental health was horrible when I was at Liberty and for many years prior to that. Being immersed in such a conservative religious environment while secretly attending conversion therapy, while also not being out to the rest of the world, was a very bad combination of factors. And obviously, I've made it, I'm still here. Despite going through very severe suicidal ideation and depression for many years, I'm still able to stand up in front of you all and talk openly about this experience. And as a result, people do often compliment me on my strength and my courage to have made it through that, and I do really appreciate that. But I'm not going to stand up here and act like it's purely by strength of willpower that I made it through. Because ultimately, it's the support that I experience from isolated people and groups that are the reason I'm still here. It's those people that created a pocket of safety for me, who made like a pocket of air that I could come back up to the surface and catch my breath, and left me with that spirit of life and love that I could carry with me through the rest of the week. They are the reason I'm still here. And prior to Liberty, during my time in high school, my sister and I decided to leave our parents' very conservative church and attended a much more welcoming, more moderate Pentecostal church. And I attended there through the rest of high school and also anytime I was home visiting from college. And I had some friends there, which included the pastors and youth group leaders, who made it a point to always say, even though many of them had deeply held religious views on sexuality that did not match up with my own, they still said that they firmly believed that God embraced everyone, no matter what, no exceptions, and homophobia was not welcome in their presence. And they didn't know I was gay, so they weren't saying it for me. It wasn't for my benefit specifically. They didn't know it, but hearing someone stand up for members of my community, even though they did not realize that representation was in the room, was something that I carried with me for years after. And I highly doubt anyone I'm talking about actually remembers any of those conversations, but I always will. In the same way, I had a roommate in college who I actually spent my entire childhood growing up with. And she didn't know I was gay until towards the end of our time together at Liberty. But even though, like earlier, both her and her family were deeply religious people, she still made it very clear, always, with her words and her actions, that hate was never welcome in her presence. And there were a lot of nights where I was laying awake long after she had fallen asleep, struggling with very severe depression and not knowing if I wanted to keep going, but I would look over at her and decide that it was worth trying at least one more day, and another one, and she had no idea that any of this was going on. But she still remained, after I came out, or rather was outed, my only Christian friend that was willing to spend time with me openly after everyone else found out that I was gay. I also had other friends, mostly online friends, that would check in with me every once in a while when I was at Liberty, and they would ask me what my preferred name and pronouns were. And they would make a very conscious effort to use those correctly, because they knew when I hung up on that Skype call, no one else was going to do that for me but them. In the same way, even though most of my professors at Liberty were very, very religiously conservative, every once in a while I'd get a professor that would make it a habit of mentioning whenever they could that it's the Christian duty, a spiritual duty, to widen the circle, not make it smaller. And if you are a religious person, if you truly believe in God and you want to show his love to other people, it is your job to add chairs to the table, not take them away. And I highly doubt those professors remember those lectures either, but I always will. My point in telling you all this is to make it clear that when LGBT people urge society at large to use a person's name and pronouns correctly, to ask for them to condemn homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, hate speech in general, whenever you encounter it, it's so important to listen because it's not just the morally praiseworthy thing to do, it is literally suicide prevention. And even when you have no idea who else is in the room with you, you don't know what their journey is or what they're carrying in their heart. You don't know what they're carrying in their soul. And I think most of those folks I've talked about now realize what effect they had on me, but at the time, to them, it was just an average Tuesday. But to me, it was literally life-saving. And coming out is extremely courageous, and surviving in the closet because you can't come out yet is just as courageous. So if you are watching this either in person or maybe on Zoom or watching a recording later, and you are going to be in the closet on National Coming Out Day, like my past self may be feeling really awful about that. If no one else is going to tell you this, I will. I'm very proud of you. And honestly, to all my friends too, in my entire life who were unknowing allies, as I would say, I'm very grateful for them. But to everyone else, before we get to our closing hymn, I want to leave you with a thought, a request rather. Please, please, pass it on. Please rise now and embody your spirit for our closing hymn, number 1053, in your teal hymnal, which is How Could Anyone?